I spoke on the radio once. In the first 30 seconds, I goofed it up so bad, I just relaxed and said, I'm already look like a fool. And then it was really good. They invited me back. You know, but it was the first 30 seconds that was so bad.
Yeah. I've had more than 30 seconds of bad radio in my time, so don't feel bad.
30 seconds is pretty good.
That's excellent, actually. That's very good.
Anytime you're ready, I'm good.
Okay.
Say, so your backlight looks good. Yeah, looks fine.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started then. So let's start by maybe first having you say your name and spell it for us.
Okay, I am Ilene Gans Sparre, and Ilene is I-L-E-N-E, Gans, G-A-N-S, and Sparre, S-P-A-R-R-E.
Great. All right, thank you. Today's date is August 28th of 2013, and we're conducting this interview on the campus of Washington State University, Tri-Cities. So let's start by having you tell me a little bit about your family and how your family came to Richland, what brought them here, and when.
Well, my father had 8 children, and we had 2 cousins living with us and Grandma, so there was 13 of us, and he bought a farm on Richland, close to Benton City on a cliff, and there was a little river down there which we could walk to and fish in. It also had quicksand, which we learned to stay away from. But it was a good place for all of us children to run around in. And of course, he thought children was money because they could work on the farm, except he had 6 girls, which kind of changed that. But he had a dairy most of his life besides the farming. And we just loved it because we had not so much rain like on the West Coast, and we had all that sagebrush to run around in, and it was just great living out there. And of course, we did what other farmers did. We saved food for winter. We canned, we froze. We had a dirt cellar, and my dad built our house. Wasn't too good at first, but it got better because there wasn't any money much, but we had a great life and lots to eat.
Where did you move from?
I think he moved from Idaho. He had inherited a piece of property. His father was 66 when he was born, and he was born in Lapaway, Idaho, and his father had gotten this property, 80 acres, for being in the Civil War, and my dad inherited that. But there wasn't any money in Idaho. There wasn't a lot of food, and it was very difficult. So he managed to sell it and got this piece of property in Richland, and that's, and we built everything from scratch.
And what were your parents' names?
Ellen and Jesse Gans.
And so what sort of crops did you grow on your farm?
Actually, I remember the watermelon. I remember the potatoes and filling our dirt cellar with potatoes and onions and carrots. And then before the war, we always went to Yakima and picked hops and got fruit and brought that back and canned it. But things changed during the war.
How so?
Okay, well, my dad, because he had so many children, they did not want him in the Army, but they made him go in the National Guard. And then he worked in the dairy and the farm during the day, and he guarded at night. So he had to do that for 2 years. In fact, he got in trouble quite a bit because he kept falling asleep while he was guarding in the middle of the night after working all day. Which is, he got threatened with court-martial a couple times because he couldn't stay awake, you know.
Where was he guarding?
Hanford project.
Oh, okay.
They confiscated him for that, and he was pretty close to it, you know, where our property was. And when they said, do this, you did it.
So on your farm, on your property, do you have any other buildings, barns?
We had lots of barns for the cows, you know, and of course back then there wasn't milking machines, so they had to be milked by hand, and the older brothers and sisters helped my dad with the milking before they went to school and after they got home, and we were all out there working all the time, you know. One of my fondest memories as a child was trying to start the car. You had to crank it, and Mother was trying to start it, but I was only 3 or 4, and I couldn't crank it fast enough. So my other sister put her foot in on the clutch, and I put my foot on the gas, and we sit on the floor, and when Mother said, let go the clutch, and give it a little gas, but keep your foot on the brake. We did it, and we got it started. This, you know, 3 and 4 year olds. But
what kind of car was that?
I have no idea, but it was an old Model T, you know.
Now, did you have electricity, telephone?
It seems like eventually we got electricity, but we started out with candles and kerosene lamps and outhouses. We never had an inside bathroom in those days.
And what about telephone?
Oh, no, there wasn't telephone anywhere. Anywhere around our area, there wasn't telephones, you know. I'm sure there must have been in town, but I don't think that I remember when I was real little. There wasn't anybody to call. You know, I mean, the world was different then.
Do you remember who any of your neighbors were at the time?
Well, across the field, Peterson. His last name was Peterson, and he was our neighbor and my dad's best friend, which is probably why we settled there, why we got the opportunity to buy that property. He had the farm next door, and it was very upsetting because he did get drafted in the Army and he did not come home from the war, you know, which was very upsetting to my father because he had lost his older brother in World War I. You know, so it was very meaningful to him. Sure. You know, but and then somewhere around the area lived the Shipleys, Claude Shipley, who was an uncle by marriage. He married my dad's older sister, and his family lived around there. But where, you know, I don't know.
What sort of irrigation did you have for your crops? You know?
Well, the river was there, and somehow my dad knew enough about old world irrigation. There was no ditches or anything in, and no, but he knew how to get the water from the river to the plants. You know, I don't know how, but it's funny. A lot of those things were passed down from generation to generation that nowadays people just don't know. Right. But he did know.
So you mentioned your father working for the National Guard,
Mm-hmm.
sort of at Hanford. So was your family able to stay on their land?
On our land, we were until when they had the accident, when some radiation leaked, and the cows ate the grass, and it got radiation, and it affected the milk. I guess it was a temporary thing, but it did affect a lot of us. It did not affect the two babies, and they were in the study that they did on the radiation because the babies had the mother's milk, but it affected all of us older ones except the one sister who was allergic to milk. She didn't have a thyroid problem, but the rest of us 6 did have a thyroid problem. And my dad then found out what was going on out there. He did not know. They didn't tell the people around what they were building. And so consequently, everybody was happy, And then when he found out, and his 2 years were almost up with the National Guards, and they said you couldn't sell your property, but he sold it anyway, and we moved. And and they didn't stop him.
So what time frame was this that this accident happened?
Well, this was probably 1940, 41, 42, somewhere along. When exactly the milk was contaminated was somewhere between 40 and 42. Maybe 43, somewhere in that area. We moved away, I think, in February, in 43. So he was really pretty upset about that,
And when did you mentioned that almost all of you developed thyroid problems?
Yes.
When did that?
Well, when you went to puberty, it came out. So, and nobody in the families had ever had a problem, including my mother got it. And nobody had ever had that problem before in the family, so just naturally, everybody assumed it was. And being so close to Hanford, our cows probably got more than somebody further away. But, again, I was a child, and they didn't tell me these things, but I was probably called Snoopy because I was always sitting in the kitchen behind the stove where they couldn't see me and listening to all the adult conversations or on the stairs, So I was so curious about everything, and every single night I listened to the news. Gable Heater, was on, and we listened to the news. We had the blackouts, where we had to make sure, and since Daddy found out, we made sure there wasn't a speck of light anywhere around our farmhouse, So it was quite a different world.
So you did have radio, and that's how...
We did have radio, so we probably had electricity, by that time. And since Hanford had electricity, they probably, came out and put it in the places around.
So about how old were you then when you moved away?
When I moved away, I 6, So, when the people starting building Hanford came in, our little town of a couple hundred people, suddenly became a quite big town of city people who were not always good, like farmers, and they just invaded everything, and there was a lot more crime suddenly, and there was the streets were crowded, and going to school, they had 2 sets of classes, early morning classes and then you had to take all your books and everything and move all your stuff away because somebody else was going to use your desk in the afternoon. And I went to kindergarten, and they put me in a year early because I was a pain to my mother. I just was this little kid that thought I knew everything. I was not a good little kid. Anyway, she took me down to school when I was 4 and put me in kindergarten. They took me. So, and then when I went to first grade, there wasn't enough room in the classroom to have a desk. So they put a bunch of us good kids at a big table. There's 2 sets of classes, There's so many people.
So was first grade when you started to see the growth in the number of students because of Hanford's site?
Well, I think more like in kindergarten that was really there, except most people didn't send their kids to kindergarten. You didn't have to. And most people didn't bother, and they were moving and all that. But my brothers and sisters didn't go to kindergarten, but she sent me, get rid of me.
What other memories do you have of the school? Do you remember the teachers or?
Well, yeah, I remember I was a teacher's pet, of course. I do remember that, and I do remember a note she sent home. Could you try to teach Ilene to be a little neater? But the teachers were overworked. Because they had to teach 2 full classrooms, because they're just this, it all happened so suddenly, and our little town didn't have that many teachers, and there weren't that many, and the workers from Hanford came in, but of course they didn't send teachers, they just, they didn't really, I don't know if they really realized how little we were, the little town was, but, and we didn't have but a little co-op where we could get flour and sugar and the basic staples along with the cow food and grain and things that we needed on the farm. And then suddenly there wasn't enough food, and they had to go bring in food from other towns and set up another store, and they were building, but there wasn't enough builders, and it was total confusion. And before Hanford came in, we knew everybody in town, but suddenly, Daddy didn't want to go shopping there anymore. He went to Prosser, It was equal distance to Prosser or Kennewick or so he just went to Prosser. And,
I know you were very young, but do you remember any of the businesses or stores that were in Richland?
Well, I remember where we got the food for the cattle and the flour. And my parents went to town only once a week, and that was on Saturday afternoon, and just once a week. And then we started going to Prosser to get food. But outside of that, I don't think there was a library. There was a school. I think there was a post office, but it was also little, a little tiny town, and there was a gas station. But I remember our church. That one Sunday it was closed because Hanford took over our church property, and so the next Sunday the pastor spoke on the radio, and I recognized that voice, and it was the first time I'd ever heard a sermon, listened in church really, and that's the day I accepted Jesus as my Savior, because I listened, And when he talked about being a sinner and needing to be saved from sin, I was such a bad little girl. I knew I needed a Savior, So I did.
So what church was that?
That was the Assembly of God, you know, and then he spoke on the radio until we could get another property and build another church. But it was just like they didn't give us any choice. It just was closed sign, you know, and they didn't give us time or anything. It's just, okay, it's shut, you know. But then everybody knew it was war, and you did what, we all cooperated because we knew what was going on, you know.
Do you remember any special community events when you were growing up, picnics or?
Well, yes, I remember there was always in Richland Park, every summer there was a story hour where they told stories, and there was a picnic, and there was a little wading pool, and we got to go swimming in the water, you know, because I was little, so, you know, and there was a little bathroom there. And one memory I have is I was only 3 or 4, maybe not even 4, but I went to the bathroom by myself, and I looked for, I remembered how to spell woman. And the last 3 letters were M-E-N. So I went in the men's, and there were men in there. I came out real fast. So they said, this is supposed to be the women's. And the man said to me, it says M-E-N. Women is W-O-M-E-N. Always look for W-O. Okay, so I found it. That's one of my memories of being at the park, in the Richland Park down there. And they had some kind of event down there every year when we took a picnic. That was before the war, you know. And again, Daddy didn't cooperate much with the town or the people after the war, because there was so many people, you know, and farmers kind of like small crowds.
Do you know if your father belonged to any, or mother belonged to any organizations in the community, the Grange or anything like that?
No, we always went to the fairs, but we went to church. That was the only time we went anywhere, was church, or if there was some reason the community was getting together and for some cause or something, and then they'd notify people, and we'd get together for have a potluck and get together. I think they had some Richland Day, something once a year that they did that with, and people were sick or needed help. The people would get together and do things, you know. I do remember that, and outside of that, I don't remember much, except my dad used to play the fiddle and the violin, and the banjo, and so people came, and at least once a month, and they played music all evening, you know. I do remember that, but you know, there weren't very many people in those days, you know, and everybody was coming from a long way. You know, I mean, we didn't have a tractor. Nobody had a tractor around, anywhere around. You plowed with the horses, you know. The world was really different in 1930s and early 40s, you know.
Did you have any specific chores as a little girl on the farm?
Well, yes. We had to feed the calves, the baby calves. There was always, on the dairy, there's always baby calves, you know, and we would make pets of them, and of course every time they were slaughtered, we'd cry, because those were our pets. you know. But we had to feed the baby ones. You know, I was little, but still, I had to feed. And whenever there was work to be done, you know, I mean, we had to participate. When I was little, I had to pick I was only 5 and I had to pick a box of cherries in the morning and a box of cherries in the afternoon. I was only 5, you know, and I didn't get my box in the afternoon finished, so my dad and everybody sat down under the tree and wouldn't go home till I finished my box. Ever after that, I worked first, played later, you know. I mean, it's just amazing, you know. Now they don't want kids to work, but it was one of the best gifts our father gave us, was the ability to work, you know, and know that was part of living, and he made it so much fun, you know. He participated with us, and I have a memory of a truckload of food coming, because we're such a big family, that during the war they came to our house and dropped off 4 or 5 boxes of food, and my dad said no. And he picked up the boxes and put them back on the truck and said, "We do not take handouts. We take care of our own. Give this to somebody who needs it." Even though we looked at those oranges and thought that was, oh, that's nice, you know, but that was a wonderful gift he gave us, because none of us are on welfare. And a big family, we all got an education. We all went to school. We took care of ourselves because he gave us the gift of we work. We help others, but we don't need the help ourselves, you know.
So you mentioned, you talked about how the small little town changed quite a bit, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember when you and your family first found out that something was going to be built not too far from your property?
Well, my dad came home from town, you know, and he says there's rumbles, you know, and of course he always listened to the radio in the morning and at noon and in the evening, you know, and with the news. And of course, you know, we knew about Pearl Harbor. And we knew about the war before then, except we weren't involved. And then suddenly we were involved. And then the government, army and everything, trucks started rumbling into town. And, you know, he knew it was something about that. And almost immediately they came by and enlisted him in the National Guard, whether he wanted to or not, you know. He was in, you know. But you couldn't object because there was war, you know. And then, of course, they started rationing the food. But we didn't have a problem because we were on the farm. We had our meat, our vegetables, our fruit, you know. And the only thing we didn't have was sugar. And Mother canned the fruit without sugar. And then we each got like 1/4 of a cup of sugar a month to last us. And if we used it all at once, and we hid it because my dad liked sugar in his coffee, and he'd take a pinch out of each one so we wouldn't miss it. So we worked hard hiding our sugar. And the first thing I remember getting up in the morning to go see if my sugar was still hid. You know, was the consequence of the war.
So you did not have to move initially.
No.
With the construction of Hanford.
No,
right?
Because we were out in the country, but we weren't far from Hanford, you know.
Right. And then you did move. Where did you move to when you sold?
Sunnyside, you know. And Daddy had studied the issue, and it was a consensus of opinions that if there was a fallout from Hanford, it would not reach Sunnyside. So it sounded like a good place to move to. So, and it was good farmland, and he got a place, Sunnyside. So.
Are there any other things, memories you have of the community of Richland or growing up on the farm that you haven't talked about yet?
Well, it's hard. You know, I can still see the school, the little school, very little school there, and coming into town, and
where was the school?
well, as you came into town, it was right up in the hills. The first thing you saw was the school, you know, and I wasn't very many students, you know, very little school, you know, and of course there were the Tri-Cities, you know, the other towns were a little bit bigger, but Richland was always pretty small. It was a farm town, you know.
Do you remember any of your classmates, any of your friends at school?
Well, I remember the Peterson boy next door, but after the war, he moved. You know, the widow and her son moved, and that's, you know, all I remember of that. But now, Mrs. Cherry was my teacher. I remember that because it sounded like cherry. I'm sure it wasn't quite cherry, but it, you know, that was as close as I got to it. The name.
And did you walk to school? Did you take a bus?
Oh no, we took a bus. We took a bus. Yeah.
And was this a regular school bus?
It was a regular school bus. I can't remember that it was very big, but it was probably, you know, a smaller big school bus, you know, and it came on right down here was the canal, and then there was the highway, and down here was our property, you know, which I remembered it being a mile down there, but it was like half a block. You know, but when you're 4 and you're walking up there to go to school, it was a long walk, you know. I remember one day playing in the canal, and Mother told us not to because the water was coming in, and my brother, who was 6 years older, he suddenly grabbed us and, get out of here, the water's coming. And it came in just as we got out of the canal. You know, I do remember that. But it didn't seem like it was a long bus ride, you know, and it doesn't seem like the bus was full. So, you know.
So I know, again, that you were young still when you moved away, but overall, what were your thoughts about growing up in Richland, in that small town?
Well, we loved where we were. I mean, down there on the water, my brothers built a raft and had a pole, and we, you know, went all around and we fished and played in there, but there was quicksand there. And one day, Daddy's prize cow got caught in the quicksand, and all the neighbors came, but before they could pull it out, it drowned. You know, think of us kids playing down there, you know. I mean, but we knew where the quicksand was, so we didn't go over there, you know. And my dad was an old-fashioned man. He was very, very good. He never lost his temper, but if he said something and you disobeyed, he did have a razor strap. And, you know, he knew how to use it, but you didn't get beat on because you didn't get spanked more than once. That was it, you know, which was very good. You know, reminds me of the verse in the Bible. It says, fathers, don't make your children angry. Go ahead and spank them if they need it. And that's a pretty good thing. Just do it and get it good enough, and then you won't have to do it again. And that's what my father did. So, we just obeyed him. And then he was so kind, was very kind. So we had a great home life, And he played music, and as we grew up, all of us had to play instruments. And can you imagine? He made us practice an hour a day, and all of us playing different instruments, It's like, it was bad enough listening to my girls practice the piano.
What instrument did you play?
What?
instrument
I played the oboe and the clarinet and the piano. Except I really don't make music. I'm really not musical. But I played because that's what we did in our house, But, we had so much fun growing up in Richland, and it was not that much fun in Sunnyside, because we were pretty close to town. There were people all around, and they had rules and regulations, that we weren't accustomed to. Mother put us in pants, shorts to play in Richland, and the town people in Sunnyside objected to that, So we couldn't wear them. It was just, just so different than living out in the country, and Mother always had Sunday dinner, and people were always over in Richland, I don't remember if they were always relatives, but it seems like a lot of them were friends, and who they were, I don't remember. Yeah.
So your father sold your farm. Is that farm still operation today, or?
Well, there's a nice house down there, but what's on it, and there's quite a few houses down in that section, we walked to the back of the farm, and we could fish in I think it was the Yakima River, and it was. And I remember catching a fish there when I was probably 5, I was the only one that caught a fish that day. I remember that. But there was so many things to do and to be inventive and play, which was really good for us. But it was just different when we moved where there were people.
Do you know if your parents felt similarly about leaving Richland, if they were sort of disappointed that they had?
Well, they both really wanted out. Mother knew that my father couldn't continue to guard and run a dairy. He couldn't continue to do that. He was exhausted. And yet that didn't seem to register, or they didn't care. I'm sure it wasn't that they didn't care, but I'm sure the Army officers had their own set of way of thinking, and it was a crisis, so, it was just really hard. And so they were both very thankful to move,
Well, I think I've asked all the questions I have. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
I'd take a look at my list, but I probably have mentioned, this is the wrong one. But I think I've pretty much covered everything that I can think of.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in today, Ilene. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I wish I could remember more, but, I think it's neat that you're doing this. And thank you for asking me.
Well, thanks for coming in.